The shot that rang out through the canyon walls was not meant to kill, but to warn Grace. Zimmerman froze at the sound, looking down only to discover a rattlesnake coiled at her boot, its beady eyes fixed on her with deadly intent. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she realized in that terrifying moment that her next breath might be her last. Arizona Territory, 1883. The unforgiving desert sun beat down on the dusty terrain outside Tucson, where the line between survival and death was often as thin as a playing card. Grace had come west with dreams bigger than the open sky, leaving behind the stifling confines of Boston society for the promise of independence as a schoolteacher in a frontier town. What she hadn't anticipated was how the wild landscape would both terrify and captivate her at every turn. The snake's rattle was a sound she'd been warned about but had never truly understood until this moment, the unmistakable warning of imminent danger. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even cry out as the diamond-patterned creature tensed to strike. "Don't move, madam," came a low, steady voice from behind her. In her peripheral vision, she caught sight of a tall figure moving with deliberate quickness. Before she could process what was happening, a man lunged forward, placing himself between her and the venomous threat. The snake struck with lightning speed, fangs sinking into the leather of his chaps but finding flesh beneath. The man staggered slightly but managed to draw his pistol in one fluid motion. With deadly accuracy, he fired a single shot, and the rattlesnake lay still in the dust. Only then did Grace find her voice. "My God, you're hurt." The cowboy holstered his weapon and turned to face her. Pain etched lines around his eyes, but somehow he managed a smile, weak but genuine. "Better me than you, I reckon," he said, his voice strained but steady. His eyes were the color of a summer sky, startling in their clarity against his sun-bronzed face. Blood was already soaking through the torn fabric of his pants leg. "Lucas Fallon," he managed, tipping his hat before swaying dangerously. "Grace Zimmerman," she replied automatically, rushing forward to catch him as his knees buckled. "We need to get you help immediately." "Not much time," Lucas said through gritted teeth. "Gotta stop the venom." Grace had read enough to know what needed to be done. With trembling hands, she helped him to a seated position against a nearby boulder. "Your knife," she demanded, surprised at the authority in her own voice. Lucas pulled a hunting knife from his belt, his movements already growing sluggish. She took it, slicing open his pant leg to reveal two distinct puncture wounds just above his ankle, angry red against his tanned skin. "I need to make an incision and draw out the poison," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "It will hurt." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Won't be the first time I've been cut, madam." Grace took a deep breath, steeling herself. She'd never done this before, but she'd heard the old-timers at the general store discussing snake bites. With careful precision, she made small cuts across the fang marks, then leaned down and began to suck the poison from the wound, spitting it into the dust beside them. Between extractions, she glanced up to see Lucas watching her with an expression that mingled pain with something else, admiration, perhaps. "Where's your horse?" she asked, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Tied up. Behind those rocks," he managed, gesturing weakly. "We need to get you to town. Dr. Hollister's office isn't far." Lucas shook his head. "My cabin's closer, just over that ridge. Got medicine there." Grace hesitated, weighing her options. The town was at least 3 miles back, and Lucas was growing paler by the minute. "Can you ride?" "Have to," he said simply. With determination born of desperation, Grace helped him to his feet. He leaned heavily against her as they made their way to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that eyed them warily. "Easy, Thunder," Lucas murmured, and the animal immediately calmed. Getting Lucas into the saddle took all of Grace's strength. Once mounted, he swayed dangerously, and she knew he wouldn't stay upright for long. "I'm coming with you," she declared, gathering her skirts and mounting behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the heat of fever already beginning to radiate through his cotton shirt. Hold tight, he mumbled, and they set off at a careful pace, each jolt clearly causing him pain. The ride to Lucas's cabin seemed interminable. By the time the small but sturdy structure came into view, nestled against the foothills with a corral and small barn nearby, Lucas was barely conscious. His body burned with fever, and his breathing had grown labored. Almost there, Grace encouraged, though she wasn't sure he could hear her anymore. She helped him dismount, practically carrying him the last few steps to the cabin door. Inside, it was neat but sparse, a testament to a solitary life. A bed stood in one corner, a small stove in another, and shelves lined with books that surprised her with their number and variety. "Medicine chest," Lucas gasped, gesturing weakly toward a wooden box on a shelf. Grace eased him onto the bed and rushed to retrieve it. Inside, she found an assortment of bottles and packets, among them a small vial labeled snake oil in careful handwriting. "This?" she asked, holding it up. Lucas nodded weakly. 2 spoonfuls, then on the bite. She followed his instructions, measuring the dark liquid into a spoon and helping him swallow it. His lips were cracked and dry, his eyes glazed with pain. After administering the second spoonful, she poured a small amount onto a clean cloth and pressed it against the wound. Lucas's eyes fluttered closed, and for one terrifying moment, Grace feared the worst. But the steady rise and fall of his chest reassured her. He was unconscious but alive. For the next several hours, she tended to him with single-minded focus. She bathed his forehead with cool water from the well outside, changed the dressing on his wound, and spoke to him softly, though she wasn't sure he could hear her. As twilight fell, she lit the lamps and stoked the stove, finding coffee and preparing a simple broth from supplies in his pantry. The fever raged through the night. Several times Lucas thrashed and called out, sometimes coherently, sometimes in fragments that made no sense. Names she didn't recognize, places she'd never heard of. Once, he grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "Don't let them take the herd," he pleaded, his eyes wild but unseeing. "No one's taking anything," she assured him, pressing a cool cloth to his brow. "Rest now." Toward dawn, the fever finally broke. Grace, who had been dozing in a chair beside the bed, woke to find Lucas watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in hours. "You stayed," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger. "Of course I stayed," she replied, suddenly self-conscious of her disheveled appearance. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," he admitted with a weak attempt at humor. "But I'll live, thanks to you. I think your medicine deserves most of the credit." Lucas shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "Where'd you learn to treat a snake bite like that?" Grace smiled wryly. "Books, mostly, and listening to old men tell tales at the general store." She paused. "I've never actually done it before." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Glad I could be your first, then." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight neither had intended but both felt. Grace looked away first, busying herself with straightening the blanket. "You should rest more," she said briskly. "I've made some broth if you feel up to eating." "Thank you," he said simply, but the words conveyed more than mere gratitude. Grace nodded and moved to the stove to retrieve the broth. As she ladled it into a bowl, she found herself stealing glances at the man in the bed. Even weakened by the venom, there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with physical power. "So, Miss Zimmerman," Lucas said as she helped him sit up to eat, "what brings a Boston lady out to these parts? Your accent gives you away, you know." Grace smiled, surprised that he detected her origins. "I'm the new schoolteacher in Tucson, started just last month." "Brave choice," he commented between careful sips of broth. "Necessary choice," she corrected. "There aren't many options for a woman who wishes to support herself independently." Lucas studied her over the rim of his bowl, running from something or toward something. The question was disarmingly direct. Grace found herself answering honestly before she could think better of it. "Both, perhaps. My father passed last year, leaving considerable debts. The family home had to be sold, and my mother went to live with my married sister in Philadelphia. She paused, remembering the crushing weight of loss compounded by financial ruin. I had a position as a governess, but it was untenable, meaning the master of the house had ideas about how a governess might provide additional services, she said crisply, immediately regretting her candor. Lucas's expression darkened. Man like that deserves to be horse-whipped. Yes, well, I chose to remove myself from the situation instead. She took the empty bowl from him. And you, what's your story, Mr. Fallon, Lucas, he corrected. After what we've been through, I reckon we can dispense with formalities. Grace nodded, acknowledging the point. Lucas, then, he settled back against the pillows. Not much to tell. Came west after the war between the states. Worked cattle drives for years before saving enough to stake my own claim. Got a small herd now, nothing fancy, but they're mine, this land too. His pride in this achievement was evident in his voice. You live out here alone. Just me and the cattle and thunder, of course. Got a hand that helps during calving season, but otherwise I manage. He studied her for a moment. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Like you're feeling sorry for me. I chose this life, Miss Zimmerman. Grace, she corrected with a small smile. After what we've been through, I reckon we can dispense with formalities. That earned her a genuine laugh, which quickly turned into a grimace of pain. Fair enough, Grace. As the morning progressed, Lucas's strength gradually returned. Grace changed the dressing on his wound once more, noting with relief that the angry redness had begun to subside. I should return to town, she said eventually. People will wonder what's happened to me. Lucas frowned. You can't walk all that way, and I'm in no condition to escort you properly. I can ride, Grace assured him. I grew up around horses. Not like Thunder, Lucas warned. He's particular about who sits his back. Let me at least call you a taxi. Grace laughed at the absurdity of the suggestion. A taxi out here, Lucas's eyes twinkled. Different kind of taxi. With difficulty, he pulled himself up and limped to the door. Putting 2 fingers in his mouth, he gave a piercing whistle that startled Grace with its volume. Minutes later, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Grace peered out the window to see a dun-colored Mustang trotting toward them, its gait relaxed and confident. Meet Penny, Lucas said with evident pride. Gentlest mare you'll ever ride, but smart as they come. She'll get you back to town safely. But how will you get her back? Lucas smiled. She knows her way home. As Grace prepared to leave, gathering her somewhat dusty and rumpled belongings, an awkward silence fell between them. I don't know how to thank you, Lucas said finally. For what? You saved my life first, remember? That rattlesnake would have struck me if you hadn't intervened. Still, you could have left me once we reached the cabin. Many would have. Grace met his gaze squarely. I'm not many, Mr. Fallon. I mean, Lucas. Something passed between them then, unspoken but palpable. Lucas cleared his throat. Perhaps, if you're amenable, you might allow me to call on you in town, once I'm back on my feet properly, of course. Grace felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. I would like that very much. Their parting was brief, but charged with possibility. As Grace rode away on Penny, she glanced back to see Lucas leaning against the doorframe of his cabin, one hand raised in farewell. Something had shifted in her world, as if the snake's rattle had marked not just a moment of danger, but the beginning of something entirely unexpected. True to Lucas's word, Penny delivered Grace safely to the edge of Tucson before turning of her own accord and trotting back toward the hills. The schoolteacher's absence had indeed been noted, but her explanation of being stranded by a sudden storm not entirely untrue, as a dust storm had indeed blown through the area, was accepted with little question. 2 weeks passed before Lucas Fallon appeared in town. Grace was dismissing her students for the day when she noticed him waiting outside the schoolhouse, leaning casually against a hitching post. The sight of him tall and straight, his injured leg showing only the slightest hint of stiffness, caused her heart to perform an unfamiliar flutter. Mr. Fallon, she acknowledged, aware of the curious glances from her departing students. Miss Zimmerman. He tipped his hat, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I was hoping I might escort you to dinner this evening if you're not otherwise engaged. Grace found herself smiling back. I would be delighted. That dinner at the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment Tucson had to offer, though it would hardly qualify as grand by Boston standards, marked the beginning of a courtship that soon became the talk of the small community. Lucas would ride into town once or twice a week, always appearing at the schoolhouse as classes ended, always dressed in his best shirt and with his boots polished to a shine. Their conversations ranged far and wide. Grace discovered that Lucas was remarkably well-read for a man who had spent most of his adult life on horseback. He had a particular fondness for Shakespeare, quoting passages from memory that surprised and delighted her. In turn, she shared her love of natural sciences, describing the botanical specimens she collected on her walks. "You know, you could bring those specimens to my land sometime," Lucas suggested one evening as they strolled along Tucson's main street. "The hills above my cabin have wildflowers I've never seen anywhere else." The invitation hung in the air, fraught with implications. An unmarried woman visiting a bachelor's remote homestead would certainly raise eyebrows. That would be improper, Grace said carefully. Lucas's expression grew serious. "I'd never suggest anything that would compromise your reputation, Grace. I respect you too much for that." "I know," she said softly, and she did know. In the weeks she'd known him, Lucas had shown himself to be a man of integrity. Perhaps a Sunday picnic. With proper chaperonage, of course. That Sunday picnic became a tradition over the following months. Grace would invite one of the married couples from town, usually the minister and his wife, and they would all ride out to Lucas's land. While the chaperones rested in the shade of a cottonwood tree, Lucas would show Grace the hidden beauties of his property. A spring-fed pool where deer came to drink at dusk, a ridge where wildflowers grew in profusion, the quiet glade where he sometimes came to read. As spring turned to summer, their feelings for each other deepened. Grace found herself watching the clock on Fridays, counting the hours until Lucas would appear for their weekly dinner. Lucas, for his part, began making excuses to come to town more frequently, often bringing small gifts, a wildflower pressed between pages of a book, a perfectly shaped arrowhead he'd found, once even a kitten he'd rescued from an abandoned mine shaft. The day everything changed began like any other. It was late August, and the heat pressed down on the Arizona territory like a physical weight. Grace had given her students an outdoor assignment, sketching the local flora as part of their natural history lesson. She was circulating among them, offering guidance and encouragement, when a commotion at the edge of town caught everyone's attention. A rider was approaching at breakneck speed, his horse lathered and heaving. As he drew closer, Grace recognized one of Lucas's neighbors, a grizzled rancher named Hank Thompson. "Miss Zimmerman," he called out, reining his horse to a dramatic halt that sent dust billowing. "You gotta come quick, it's fallen." Grace's heart seized. "What's happened?" "Rustlers hit his place at dawn. He drove him off, but he took a bullet. Asked for you specifically." Without hesitation, Grace turned to her oldest student. "Sarah, run and fetch Dr. Hollister. Tell him to come to Lucas Fallon's ranch immediately." To the rest of the class, she called, "School is dismissed early today. Go directly home." Within minutes, she was mounted behind Hank Thompson, clinging to his waist as they galloped toward Lucas's ranch. The journey seemed both interminable and too swift. She wanted to reach Lucas immediately, but dreaded what she might find. The scene at the ranch was one of controlled chaos. Several neighbors had already gathered, securing the remaining cattle and repairing a section of fence that had been cut. The cabin door stood open, and Grace rushed inside to find Lucas stretched out on his bed, his face ashen but his eyes alert. "You came," he said, his voice weaker than she'd ever heard it. "Of course I came." She moved to his side, assessing his condition with growing alarm. A crude bandage wrapped his upper chest, blood seeping through the fabric. "What happened?" "5 men tried to take the north herd," he managed, Recognized one, Johnny Reed, been causing trouble all over the territory. Grace carefully peeled back the edge of the bandage, wincing at the sight of the wound beneath. The bullet had entered just below his collarbone, and there was no exit wound visible. "The bullet's still inside," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Dr. Hollister is on his way." Lucas's hand found hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Grace, listen. If this goes bad, it won't," she interrupted fiercely. "If it does," he insisted, "there's a letter in my desk, top drawer, written to you months ago." Grace felt tears threaten but blinked them back. "You can tell me yourself when you're recovered." A ghost of his familiar smile crossed his lips. "Stubborn woman. You have no idea," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Doctor." Hollister arrived an hour later, bringing with him his surgical instruments and a grim expression that softened slightly when he saw Grace efficiently changing Lucas's bandage and keeping him comfortable. "You've done well," the doctor acknowledged, "but I need to get that bullet out now. It's dangerously close to his lung." The next 2 hours were the longest of Grace's life. She assisted the doctor, providing clean cloths, hot water, and an extra pair of hands when needed. The procedure was brutal in its simplicity, no anesthesia beyond a hefty dose of whiskey and Lucas's own iron will. When the doctor finally extracted the misshapen piece of lead, Lucas had long since passed out from the pain. "He's strong," Dr. Hollister said as he finished stitching the wound. "And the bullet missed anything vital. With proper care and no infection, he should recover." "I'll stay with him," Grace said, her tone making it clear this was not up for debate. The doctor eyed her speculatively. "That wouldn't be proper, Miss Zimmerman. You have your reputation to consider." "My reputation is less important than his life," she replied firmly. "But if it eases your conscience, Doctor, you may inform Mrs. Peterson that I've requested her presence as chaperone." Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, arrived that evening with a basket of food and a practical attitude that Grace found immensely comforting. "No need to explain, dear," the older woman said, patting Grace's hand. "Some situations transcend convention. Now you sit with him while I prepare us something to eat." For 3 days, Grace barely left Lucas's side. She bathed his forehead when fever threatened, changed his bandages with gentle hands, and spoke to him constantly, whether he was conscious or not. On the 4th morning, she woke from a brief nap in the chair beside his bed to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert. "You're still here," he said softly. "Where else would I be?" she replied, reaching for his hand. A smile touched his lips. "Did you read my letter?" Grace shook her head. "No, you're going to tell me yourself, remember?" Lucas shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. "Help me sit up a bit." Once he was propped against the pillows, Lucas took a deep breath. "Grace Zimmerman, I love you. Have since the moment you sucked rattlesnake venom from my leg without flinching. Maybe even before that, when I first saw you standing so brave against that snake." Grace felt her heart expanding in her chest, a joy so intense it was almost painful. "Lucas, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I'm just a rancher with a small spread and not much to offer a cultured Boston lady, but everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it." Grace found herself laughing through sudden tears. "Lucas Fallon, for such a well-read man, you can be remarkably obtuse. I've been in love with you since you smiled at me with a snake bite in your leg and still thought to reassure me." The kiss they shared then was gentle, mindful of his injury, but it sealed a promise between them that needed no further words. Their engagement was announced the following Sunday at church, to the surprise of absolutely no one in Tucson. The wedding was set for October, when the worst of the summer heat would have passed and Lucas would be fully recovered. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Lucas insisted on adding a proper bedroom to his cabin, enlisting the help of neighbors to build an addition that would give Grace the privacy a lady deserved. Grace, meanwhile, ordered fabric from catalogs and worked with the town's seamstress to create a trousseau suitable for her new life as a rancher's wife. "Will you miss teaching?" Lucas asked one evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. Grace considered the question carefully. "I'll miss the children," she admitted, "but I won't miss being constrained by the school board's narrow ideas of what's proper to teach." "You could still teach," Lucas suggested. "We've got 5 families within riding distance with children who get no schooling at all." The idea took root immediately. "A small school right here on the ranch. Lucas, that's brilliant." His smile was warm with pride. "My clever wife-to-be, bringing education to the frontier. And our own children someday, of course." The mention of children brought a blush to Grace's cheeks, but also a surge of happiness. The future they were building together seemed full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine for herself. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the October sky a flawless blue that matched Lucas's eyes. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, held in Tuckson's small church, with flowers gathered from the hills around Lucas's ranch decorating every surface. Grace wore a gown of ivory silk, simpler than what would have been fashionable in Boston but perfect for her new life. As she walked down the aisle toward Lucas, who stood tall and straight in a new suit, she felt a certainty that transcended the usual bridal nerves. This man, this place, this life, it was where she belonged. The minister's words were traditional, but the vows Grace and Lucas exchanged were personal, reflecting the unique journey that had brought them together. When Lucas spoke of protecting and cherishing her all the days of his life, there wasn't a dry eye in the church. Everyone present knew he had already proven his commitment by taking a rattlesnake's bite meant for her. The celebration afterward was lively and prolonged, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. As twilight fell, the newly married couple slipped away, riding together toward their home in the hills. "Happy, Mrs. Fallon?" Lucas asked as they crested the final ridge, their cabin visible below, lamplight glowing in the windows. Mrs. Peterson had gone ahead to prepare the house for their arrival. "Completely," Grace replied, leaning to kiss her husband's cheek. "Though I'll be happier still when we're truly alone." Lucas's laugh was rich with promise. "That can be arranged." Life as a rancher's wife was demanding but deeply satisfying. Grace rose before dawn each day, preparing breakfast while Lucas tended to the most urgent ranch tasks. They worked side by side much of the time, mending fences, caring for livestock, planting a vegetable garden that soon became the envy of neighboring ranches. True to her word, Grace established a small school that met 3 days a week in a converted corner of their barn. Children from surrounding homesteads rode or walked for miles to attend, their eagerness for knowledge rewarding Grace in ways her formal teaching position never had. Their first winter together brought challenges: a blizzard that trapped them indoors for nearly a week, a bout of illness that left Lucas weakened for days, the loss of several cattle to wolves. But it also brought moments of profound intimacy. Long evenings reading aloud by lamplight, teaching each other favorite games from childhood, the shared warmth of their bed against the biting cold outside. Spring arrived with renewed promise and a significant announcement. Grace was expecting their first child, due in late summer. Lucas's reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy mingled with protectiveness, pride with humility at the miracle they had created together. "A baby," he whispered against her hair as they lay together that night. "Our baby." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Grace asked, placing his hand over the slight swell of her abdomen. "Healthy," Lucas replied without hesitation. "Beyond that, I have no preference. Though I must admit, a little girl with your eyes and spirit would be a wonder to behold." As Grace's pregnancy progressed, Lucas became increasingly attentive, insisting on taking over more of her usual tasks despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. "Humor me," he would say, gently steering her to a chair in the shade when the summer heat became oppressive. "I've only got one wife, and I intend to keep her well." The baby, a daughter they named Emma Rose, arrived on a star-filled August night with the help of a midwife from a neighboring ranch. Lucas, defying convention, refused to wait outside during the birth, instead supporting Grace through each contraction with steady encouragement and unwavering presence. When he held his daughter for the first time, the look of wonder on his face brought fresh tears to Grace's eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the tiny bundle to her mother's arms, just like her mother. Life with a baby brought new rhythms to their days. Grace adapted her teaching schedule, bringing Emma with her to the small schoolroom where the older girls delighted in taking turns holding the infant during lessons. Lucas built a cradle that could be rocked with a foot while hands remained free for other tasks, and he took to singing old trail songs as lullabies, his deep voice soothing their daughter to sleep. Their second year of marriage brought prosperity to the ranch. Lucas's careful breeding program began to show results in the quality of their cattle, and prices at market were higher than expected. They were able to hire a full-time hand to help with the heavier work, giving Lucas more time to expand their holdings and Grace more freedom to develop her small school. On the anniversary of the day they met, the day of the Rattlesnake, Lucas surprised Grace with a gift. A small golden pendant in the shape of a snake, cunningly crafted so that it curved into a heart. "Some might think it macabre," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "but to me that snake was fate's way of bringing us together." Grace touched the pendant, feeling its weight against her skin. "It's perfect." A reminder that sometimes what looks like danger is actually the beginning of something wonderful. Their life together fell into a pattern that balanced hard work with simple pleasures. Sundays were reserved for family time, rides into the hills, picnics by the spring, occasionally trips into Tucson for church and visiting. Lucas continued to expand their library, ordering books from as far away as New York and San Francisco. Grace's school grew to include adult education sessions twice monthly, teaching reading and basic arithmetic to ranch hands and homesteaders who'd never had the opportunity to learn. When Emma was 2, a son joined their family, Lucas Jr., promptly nicknamed Luke. The boy had his father's coloring but his mother's quick mind, showing an early affinity for books that delighted both parents. Emma, meanwhile, developed a fearless interest in the workings of the ranch, following her father everywhere and absorbing knowledge about cattle and horses with remarkable thoroughness. "She's going to be a better rancher than me someday," Lucas observed proudly as 5-year-old Emma correctly identified which cows were likely to calve first that season. "She has an excellent teacher," Grace replied, adjusting baby Luke on her hip. The years brought changes to the territory around them. The railroad reached Tucson, bringing increased commerce and new settlers. The small school Grace had started in their barn grew into a proper schoolhouse serving children from a dozen families, with Grace supervising 2 younger teachers while continuing to teach the advanced students herself. Lucas's reputation as a cattleman of integrity spread, bringing offers of partnership from larger operations. He declined most, but accepted a few that allowed them to expand their herd without sacrificing the quality of care he insisted upon for his animals and his land. Through it all, their love deepened, growing from the initial spark of attraction into something as essential and sustaining as the air they breathed. They still occasionally argued, Grace's stubborn independence clashing with Lucas's protective instincts, his occasional recklessness concerning her practical nature, but they never went to sleep angry, following a pact made on their wedding night. On their 10th anniversary, with the children staying overnight with friends in town, Lucas took Grace riding to the exact spot where they had first met. A small stone marker now stood there, placed by Lucas years earlier, inscribed simply with the date and their initials. 10 years, Grace mused, dismounting to touch the sun-warmed stone. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Lucas joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. At 43, he was still as strong and vital as the day they'd met, though silver now threaded his dark hair at the temples. "Best 10 years of my life," he murmured against her ear. Grace turned in his embrace, studying the face she knew better than her own. A few more lines around his eyes, a certain weathered quality to his skin from years in the sun, but still unmistakably her Lucas. At 38 she too had changed, her figure fuller after bearing 2 children, her hands less soft from years of ranch work, but neither of them saw these changes as diminishment. Rather, they were markers of a life fully lived together. "Would you do it again?" she asked, genuinely curious. Knowing everything, the hardships, the struggles, the dangers, Lucas didn't hesitate, in a heartbeat. "Though I'd try to avoid the rattlesnake bite if possible." Grace laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "I don't know, that snake bite brought you to my attention rather effectively." "Is that so?" Lucas raised an eyebrow, a playful glint in his eye. "And here I thought it was my natural charm and good looks." "Those didn't hurt," she conceded, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "But there was something about the way you smiled at me, even in pain, that told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man you are." They spread a blanket beneath the cottonwood tree that had witnessed their first meeting, sharing a picnic lunch and memories of the decade they'd spent together. As the afternoon waned, Lucas produced a bottle of fine champagne he'd special ordered from San Francisco. "To the next 10 years," he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "And the 10 after that, and however many more were granted." Grace sipped the bubbly wine, savoring both its taste and the moment. "To us," she replied simply. Later, as they rode home side by side, Grace found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a Boston society girl to a frontier schoolteacher to a rancher's wife and mother, it was not the path she had envisioned for herself as a young woman. Yet she couldn't imagine any other life bringing her greater fulfillment. "Penny for your thoughts," Lucas said, noticing her contemplative mood. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected beginnings," she replied. "If someone had told me 15 years ago that I'd find happiness on a cattle ranch in the Arizona territory with a cowboy who took a snake bite for me, I'd have thought them deranged." Lucas chuckled. "And if someone had told me I'd win the heart of the most beautiful, intelligent woman I'd ever met by getting myself bitten by a rattler, I'd have gone looking for snakes a lot sooner." Their laughter mingled in the clear air as they crested the final hill before their ranch came into view. The cabin, now expanded into a proper house with a covered porch wrapping around 3 sides, stood solid and welcoming against the backdrop of the mountains. Smoke curled from the chimney where their housemaid would be preparing dinner in anticipation of their return. In the corral, 6 horses grazed peacefully, while cattle dotted the hillsides beyond. It was a scene of prosperity born of hard work and shared vision, of love made tangible in the world they had built together. As they approached, Lucas reached across the space between their horses to take Grace's hand. "Home," he said, the word encompassing far more than the physical structures before them. Grace squeezed his hand in response, her heart full. "Home," she agreed. That night, after a celebratory dinner with their children and closest friends, Lucas and Grace stood on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. The future stretched before them, as wide and promising as the territory itself, their children growing toward adulthood, their ranch flourishing, their love a constant in a changing world. "We've been blessed," Lucas observed, his arm warm around Grace's shoulders. "Indeed we have," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I suspect we've had some hand in creating those blessings ourselves." Lucas turned to face her, his expression earnest in the soft lamplight spilling from the window. "Every good thing in my life began the moment I saw you standing there with that rattlesnake at your boot. I didn't think twice about putting myself between you and danger. It was instinct, pure and simple." "And that instinct gave us all of this," Grace said, gesturing to encompass their home, their life together. Worth every drop of venom, Lucas declared, bending to kiss her beneath the canopy of stars. As they stood together on the threshold of their second decade as husband and wife, the lesson of their beginning remained at the heart of their story. That sometimes the greatest dangers lead to the greatest joys, and that courage, the courage to risk oneself for another, to build a life far from everything familiar, to love completely despite life's uncertainties, was the foundation upon which true happiness was built. The rattlesnake that had coiled at Grace's boot all those years ago had long since returned to dust. But the legacy of that moment of Lucas's selfless act and the bond it had forged between them continued to shape their days. A reminder that love, like the frontier itself, required both tenderness and strength, both wisdom and faith. And just as they had transformed the wild land around them into a thriving ranch, so too had they transformed a chance encounter into a lifetime of shared purpose and abiding love. In the years that followed, as their children grew and eventually brought grandchildren to brighten their later years, as the territory became a state and the frontier gradually gave way to civilization, Lucas and Grace Fallon remained a constant in a changing world. Their love story, which began with a rattlesnake's warning rattle and a cowboy's weak but genuine smile, continuing to unfold in ways neither could have imagined that fateful day beneath the Arizona sun.